Hi, thanks for opening this Lean Business Introduction Program. And my name is Steve Halpin. And for the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to give you an introduction to how you might create a lean culture in your particular organization. Just a brief introduction to myself. My engineering is my background. I came out of UCD and I worked for about 20 years in multinational corporations, both in the UK and in Ireland, where in many cases lean is well established. I came across lean with Schlumberger back in the early 90s. I've been working with companies for the last number of years, since 2006, and you'll see on the screen a sample of companies that we've worked with. The message here is that lean is for probably every business in any sector, in any function. I'm going to explain that shortly. I always ask people where they think this latest version of lean comes from and why we're all talking about lean these days. And my story here is, if you were in the United States in the early 80s, the chances are that anybody you met, they owned a car. If they were a car owner, they owned a car that was built in the United States. So almost 100% of people bought cars that were built in the USA. And that situation changed quite rapidly in the 80s. So by the end of the 80s, probably only one in four Americans had bought a car that wasn't built in America, but actually was built outside of America and mainly built in Japan or built by Japanese companies. And that was quite a swing in the automotive market in less than 10 years. One study that came out in 1989, that's the start of my lean story for you, and that's the MIT study of lean in the car industry. And they studied 40 different car industries, car businesses, some based in the US, some based in Europe, and then Japanese companies, both ones that were based in the US and ones that were based in Japan. So here's a short summary of that study, 1989. And it splits them into the four categories. So the first thing we're going to look at is productivity. And what they found was that it took about 17 hours in Japan to build a car, and that same car would take about 36 hours to build in Europe, or 25 hours in America, or 21 hours in the Japanese companies in North America. So in 1989, the Japanese companies established in America were already outperforming their American counterparts in terms of productivity. Now, what we always say is there's no point in building something fast. We've got to contrast this with quality. And the study also refers to an independent quality survey in 1989, the JD Power survey. And that independent study showed that the defects per 100 vehicles was also lower in the Japanese-made cars compared to the European and American-made cars. So not only are the cars built faster, but the performance and the quality of the cars is found to be better. A third metric I'll put up here, interesting one, is repairs, internal repairs. So within the Japanese companies, less than 5% of their assembly area for making cars was dedicated to repair. And that number, as you can see, in American and European companies is over 10%. So less repairs going on internally, and obviously, as we see from the quality figures, less faults externally. And the last metric I'm going to put up here is what people in the 80s all latched onto, and this was JIT, just in time, because of the fantastic management of inventory and cash flow by the Japanese companies. And this here is it's another metric from the study. It's looking at sample parts from suppliers in terms of days sales. And these numbers are quite good across the board. In the American and European companies, we can see 2 or 3 days of inventory of supplied parts from 8 sample parts from suppliers. In North America, Japanese companies, 1.6 days, but in Japan, that figure is about 0.2 or 2 hours. So the companies are operating with about 2 hours stock. So they're KPIs, key performance indicators, things that differentiated what became known as lean companies. It was the MIT study that gave the name lean to this performance. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is the next slide. These are great results, but how do you get them? How do you get them in your company? And we talk an awful lot about tools and JIT and all these things, but really it's about the culture. And here's what the study found in terms of culture. So the first metric I put up here is interesting differentiation between the Japanese companies, the Americans and the Europeans. The first metric is what percentage of the workforce are engaged in improvement and improvement teams in particular. In Japan, that figure represents about 70%. 7 in 10 people employed are somehow involved in performance improvement, making the process better. In the American companies, that number is about 17%, and in the European companies, it looks like we didn't understand the question. Generally, people that made decisions were either the business owners or the high-level management team, or we got some external consultants in. So that's an interesting comparator. The second one people talked about a lot, again in the 80s. This is the number of ideas per employee per year. And you can see in the Japanese companies operating in Japan, in the automotive sector, about 62 ideas per person per year. A phenomenal rate of ideas and suggestions coming from the workforce. Not quite established in the American companies, the Japanese companies in America in 89, and then the American and European companies, you can see that number is 0.4, which represents less than one idea every 2 years per employee. So quite a different culture going on in comparison. Our third metric focuses on training, and we can see here that the Japanese companies were hugely invested in training. Now this is the amount of hours for a production worker, somebody actually building a car. And we can see that that number in Japan is 370 or 380 hours, compared to in America 46, and in Europe about 173 hours. So big focus here on training. Put these three together and we've got a workforce that's engaged in process improvement, one that's ideas are listened to, and one who we invest in terms of career development or training. And the fourth metric is probably no surprise, in that what was found in the study was absenteeism in the Japanese companies is less than half of the American and European counterparts. And this to me is the fundamental difference between a lean approach and a non-lean approach. It's about engaging people. It's about listening to people. It's about involving them and making their own processes better. And when we do that and we find better ways, it's about standardizing those ways and making sure that the rest of the business is trained in these methods. At this stage, some people often say to me, it's not for us, we're not Japanese, we're Irish or English or European, and maybe these results are part of a Japanese culture. This story really reflects Toyota, who came top of this study, and Toyota set up their first Toyota-owned plant in the US in 1986, and that plant was set up not in the hotbed of manufacturing of cars up in Detroit, but it was set up in Kentucky. And again, most of the employees were hired locally, and most of the locally hired employees, the production workers, had no previous experience of building cars. So these results are achieved with a workforce outside of the industry who outperformed the American counterparts probably within 3 years here, according to this study. So this is something that is achievable, and I think it's achievable in any business if we take the right approach with the people. So all of those numbers are available in a book called The Machine That Changed the World, and you can see the subtitle of that is the story of lean production. And authors were Womack and Jones and Daniel Roos. Again, Womack and Jones still talking about lean and working in the sector, and if you go on to www.lean.org, you'll see plenty of case studies. Daniel Jones currently works with UK Healthcare, and James Womack is still active in MIT. Second book came out in the mid-90s, because I suppose a lot of people would have dismissed the original book. If you weren't in automotive manufacturing, you may not bother reading it. So a second book called Lean Thinking was published in the 90s, which elaborates on the culture and the performance, what really talks about engineering companies, healthcare, banks, a wide range of sectors. I put this cartoon together. Some people at this stage might think we can't afford all of this training and employee development, and we're far too busy, we don't have the time, we don't have the money. So the man on the left will be our financial controller, expressing his concern. What if we spend all the money on training our employees? And of course then they leave. And hopefully the enlightened CEO on the right says, what if we don't and they stay? And I use this as an introduction to Never blaming people for the problems in a business. I mean, we all have experience of different businesses, and sometimes our first inclination is to blame the people that we're dealing with. From a lean point of view, we try to look beyond that, and we ask the question, do they really have processes that support their activities? Or were they trained in those processes? Did we really define them? So I think the comment on the right, what if we don't and they stay? Have we got a lot of poorly trained people trying to do the best they can and struggle through the business on a daily basis? So our approach, your team, we think that your team are probably the best consultants that you'll ever hire. Maybe not always to look for answers from outside the business, because if we haven't explored the answers inside the business first, we're probably missing a huge amount of information. So on that theme, I'm going to ask the question, and I would ask it of any business: is every business simply a series of processes? And referencing Edwards Deming, who worked with Toyota back in the 50s, and his statement here, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, maybe you don't know what you're doing. And he would suggest that the first part of any process improvement program is making sure that we're clear what it is we're doing at the moment, and that everybody is doing the same. Because if everybody's doing something quite differently or their own way, then we don't have a standard process on which to base our process improvements. So that's the start of any lean process. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to just give you 10 tips that I hope you might find interesting. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but things that you might take away having looked at this presentation. As I say, they're really focused around engaging people in your process. The first question I pose to anybody is, if you think about yourself as a customer and you spend your money on products and you spend your money on services, and sometimes you have a fantastic experience, one that you want to tell your friends about, one that you want to share with people, and then you have your bad days, when you have really bad experiences, and maybe you need to take a break and take a coffee, and the first person you meet, you need to tell them how bad it was. And we all have these ups and downs. So think about you as a customer, and the first thing you need to do with your business is look at your business from the viewpoint of the customers. Would your customers recommend your business, or would they be trying to avoid it? What parts of your business excites them and would they tell people about, and what parts frustrate them? So we always look at value in terms of any process from the point of view of the customer. Even internally in a business, who uses the outputs of the process, ask them how it's doing, and that's your real measure. Our second tip to take away is the opposite of value is waste. And from a lean point of view, waste is usually measured in time, and we waste an awful lot of time in business. And if you remember the acronym Tiger Woods, it might give you some clues as to where that waste is. Now, some of this is based on the original waste from Toyota, and there's a couple of service-based wastes. So if we take Tiger Woods, it's an easy way to remember the 10. Our first is transport. Anytime you're moving things around, be that goods or be that paperwork, then we're losing time. And from a lean point of view, that's waste. Our second waste is having too much in the process. Again, whether that's products or goods, or whether it might be orders or requests. The more we have, the slower the process is. And it applies to everything from manufacturing through to healthcare. Our third waste, and I couldn't think of a negative word to fit in with the rest, but the absence of great customer service is a waste. No matter how good our product or service is, it could be the best on the market. If the interaction point for the customer is poor, and that could be a phone call, it could be a face-to-face meeting, it could be receiving something in writing that's poorly written, unprofessionally written. If the customer feels like they're not being treated well, it doesn't matter how good your product is. And generally that's something that we can address without spending a whole lot of money. Our fourth waste is how well we're organised in our business. And again, ergonomics or workplace organisation. Again, simple tools that we can address, and I'll mention that a little bit later. Another one from the service industry is the amount of time wasted reconfirming what needs to be done, trying to understand instructions, just basic communication, maybe between different sections of a business or between customer and business. So unclear requirements that need to be confirmed on a regular basis. W is easy, just waiting. How much time is spent waiting? Sometimes it's people waiting on work, sometimes it's work waiting on people. So lots and lots of areas where we lose time with our staff just simply waiting. Next one is overproduction, and I'm going to give an example of that in a moment, because when we think of overproduction, we often think of a manufacturing company producing goods that sit on shelves and are never bought, and that certainly is one overproduction, as Toyota discussed, but I'm going to mention one shortly from a service organisation. Our second O is overprocessing, and this is where we do more work than the customer requires. And it could be over elaborate in terms of inspection, or over elaborate in terms of functionality that the customer really doesn't value a whole load. Nice to have maybe, but really over processing from the process point of view. D is manufacturing more defects, or service word errors. Mistakes cost us money, and again, the more mistakes we probably find, we spend an inordinate amount of time correcting mistakes and regaining customer trust. And the final waste probably came from a book written in the 90s, is the waste of skills. As we mentioned in the introduction to this presentation, some businesses, we just don't tap into the internal skills that we have within the workforce and all the ideas that exist there. So they're the definitions of waste, the opposite of value. So I did promise an overproduction example, and this one is a real one from a lady in the bank who told me that on a monthly basis she produces a report which takes her about 4 hours. It's a combination of many Excel reports in the business that she summarises, does some basic calculations, and then emails out to the greater population. She's been doing it for 3 years and took over from a previous person who was doing this report. On the back of a lean program, she decided that she didn't know who her customer was and didn't know whether our customers were valuing the information. In fact, didn't really know whether our customers were even reading the report. So she decided to password protect the report before she sent it out. And in the first month, nobody came looking for the password. And in the second month, nobody came looking for the password. And 3 months in, nobody had asked her for the password. So out came a note to everybody to say that it's come to their attention that the report hadn't been accessed for 3 months, and they decided to phase out the report and re-ask the customers whether there was any information that they still needed. Our view here is that that report, once upon a time, probably held a lot of value and helped people solve some problems. But now, like in many businesses, the report continues to exist, but maybe its reason for being has long since disappeared. And we find this again and again. So it is a case where the staff are overproducing, in this case, information, which subsequently isn't required. So it brings us on to our tip number 3. And looking at every business as a process and taking that a bit further, we're all familiar perhaps with applying for a passport, or maybe applying for a new passport. In Ireland at the moment, the Passport Express target is that if you apply the Express option, you should have your passport within the target 10 days. I haven't worked in the passport office, but I have met people that have received their passport within the hour, obviously in an emergency situation. So we can surmise from that we typically might wait 10 days, maybe longer, for a passport, yet the actual value added work to produce that passport is probably about an hour. And what we call a value stream map is simply a map of that time. Wouldn't it be interesting to map those 10 days from the time the customer applied for the service to receiving, in this case, the product, the passport, and where was that hour's work? Where did it happen in the 10 days? And we'll define that map in terms of red and green. Red time being time where nothing's happening, and green time is where we're adding value. And in terms of mapping, there's a comment here from Taiichi Ono, who was a mechanical engineer who worked with Toyota all his life, and he was asked, how come Toyota is so successful? How come this company is making so much more bottom line profit than the competition? And his answer, or one of his answers, was all we do is look at the timeline. Again, from the moment the customer gives us an order to the point where we either ship the product or collect the cash. And we reduce that timeline by removing the non-value added waste. So again, this is continuation of the waste theme, and it's what we call red time. So if we think about our application for Passport Express and receiving a new passport, we know that 10 days go by, but we know there's probably only an hour's work involved. And maybe that hour is split over different departments. Maybe it's the people that process the information into the system. We know there's something done with a photograph. We know there's some printing done. We know there's some reference checking done. So it would be very interesting to look at that process. And the Toyota approach to that would be, how could we improve the customer experience? And generally, what Ono was saying is, we do that by focusing on the process and the red time. The chances are that the green work or the green time, that hour will still be required. The question is, when is it done and how well is it integrated with the rest of the process? So that's a very, very basic, what we call value stream map. And value stream mapping is one of the key tools that we would use to look at any process, especially for the first time. Try and produce a current state map. What's actually happening from the point of view of the customer. Tip number 4, there's many methods out there for problem solving, and we are all problem solvers. We all solve problems in business, we solve problems at home. Interesting if we could map down what is the process, what process do we use to solve problems, and with a little bit of thought we could map down some steps that we probably all take. All of this is common sense. And this was mapped into 8 steps. I'm going to show you the 8 steps. So this will prove that anybody in your organization can be a problem solver. And if your organization has a 0% employee engagement, why not get that up to the 70% or more? And the method they need to follow, or could follow, one of the methods, simply stated is plan, do, check, act. Something when I first saw I thought way too simplistic, and I probably dismissed it originally. However, there are 8 steps that support this plan, do, check, act. And the first 5 steps actually support the planning. And it doesn't come naturally to most companies. Step number 1, and again we often find that many projects fall down on this, is truly defining the problem that we're trying to solve. Sometimes that problem is very unclear and we move on ahead very quickly because we all want to get the solution. The second discipline is to put a bit of time into understanding the current state. It could be a map, it could be some data, it could be getting some expertise involved or experience of the people involved to understand what's happening. Our third step, again very often quickly moved over, is being very clear, what are we trying to achieve? What exactly are we trying to achieve? Is it measurable, and by when? Our fourth step is generally trying to look at the problem and all of the possible causes, as many causes as we can think of from all the viewpoints and all the stakeholders, and explode out the problem into lots of causes. Our fifth step is to agree which of these causes are our priority, and to address the priority causes and agree countermeasures on those. Typically with problems and project management, often half the time of our project is spent on these first 5 steps. And what the Japanese would say is, don't go solving a problem until you've shown clearly that you understand that problem first. So if the first 5 steps are done well, 6, 7 and 8 tend to be quite easy. So 6 is implementation, maybe doing some small scale trials, maybe running in a pilot, it could be some experimentation, and again we've got to collect data. Our 7 is making sure that we evaluate the results, we collect those, we share them. Ideally we evaluate them against the target that we identified in step 3. And our step 8, if everything goes well, we standardize our success. And that might include training, it might include documentation, it might include putting some design changes so we can't get the mistake, we can't see the mistake again. However, it might be that we evaluated and things didn't go to plan. So the reason why this circle goes round again is that we learn from failure. And probably in any business we learn more when things don't go to plan. So if it doesn't go to plan, the chances are that one of our earlier steps, we've missed something. And the more we go back and look at that and learn and redo our 8 steps, the better problem solvers our staff will become. And it's about creating an environment to allow people to make those mistakes and really understand these 8 steps. That was first written down. This methodology was first written down by Short in the Bell Labs in the 1930s. And this methodology has been used by Toyota since Deming brought it to them in the 1950s. And it's still being used today. So 8-step problem solving, anybody can understand it, anybody can apply it. Tip 5 is about Kaizen, and Kaizen is about the team effectively exploding out any problem into the potential causes. Most people will get engaged with this type of activity. A real key here is that Kaizens don't start off with trying to identify the solution. Allow everybody to talk about what might be causing the problem. And let's look at all angles and get everybody's ideas on a page. Kaizen events, hugely energetic, great for businesses, great to engage people, do require an investment of time, but generally will deliver that back multiple times over if done well. And typically, we allow people to use post-its, post ideas. We don't discard any ideas. Our next step, as I said earlier, is to prioritise those ideas and to support them in terms of countermeasures. Tip 6 is all of this problem solving will only happen in a safe environment. And for me, one of the best descriptions of this is in a book from Stephen Spear. And the book is called The High Velocity Edge. And in this book, in his introduction to Lean, he talks about his local hospital in the States and the story of a patient being found dead one morning. And it turned out that the initial diagnosis was human error. One of the nurses on the night shift had given the wrong medication. And again, hands up, admitted it, made a mistake. And our typical response to that might be that that person's work needs to be watched, maybe that person needs to be retrained. We rarely get as far as putting some time into looking at the process. And in the example Spear gives, when he got the nurses together and they discussed what might have happened and what were all the causes or potential causes, people began to come up with lots of ideas. On the night shift, the lights are dim, very difficult to see the medication. The labels are small, very difficult to read the labels. All the medications on one trolley. All the medications, some of the medications are clear vials, all look very, very similar, no colour coding. So lots and lots of ideas were coming out about how this process might be improved. And the question that Spear asks is, why did nobody say anything until somebody died? And that's the question that has to be asked in any business. Have we actually got an environment for people to come forward with ideas or improvements? Or has it been done before but hasn't been listened to? Do we provide the time? Because if people have come up with ideas before but nothing has happened, again, that tends to kill any chance of further ideas coming from the same people. So Lean only happens where we create that environment for people to come up with ideas. And it needs to be a safe environment so ideas don't get shot down. It needs to be a safe environment so ideas don't get put on file forevermore and never get used. It needs to be a quick turnaround or high velocity turnaround of the ideas to implementation. And speaking to many Lean companies, that tends to exist where ideas get turned around into implementation in literally hours, days, and on rare occasion weeks, but rarely beyond that. Tip number 7, quality comes first. Lean, some people believe, is about cutting corners, reducing costs. And it's possibly the opposite. It's about getting the process right first. My one slide on quality that I use with lots of groups, it comes from Ken Creef, and Ken worked with Toyota in the US. And in terms of process, the one quality rule is don't make an error. And that rule to be accepted by everybody in the plant. Now, at first, that looks a bit basic, but really what it's saying is that we want to provide a safe environment to every employee that if that employee is in any doubt, either they have the wrong information, they don't have the right training, there's something wrong with the equipment, whatever it is, don't go ahead. Stop. Stop and get the situation looked at and resolved. And the idea is to create that environment for everybody in the business. It's a very brave move, and it's probably an aspirational move. But ideally, what we would like is that most business leaders accept that and try to support that approach. And it's, again, creating this safe environment so that people actually say, there's something wrong here. I don't want to make a risk in the process here, that something might go wrong. The second rule of quality is that if I receive something that's wrong, that I flag and I raise it and I go back. This could be internally within the business, or it could be something received externally outside the business. But again, if we receive substandard materials or information, and we go ahead and correct and process anyway, again, we're introducing risk into the operation. And the most expensive mistake is not to take any action and to simply pass on potentially an error to the next stage, because in that case the lead time is ticking on for the customer, and chances are that the cost of repairing anything that's found later on becomes more expensive the further it goes through the process. So quality comes first in any process, and again, it's about creating that environment for people to recognize when things aren't correct and support them in making them right. Tip number 8. Deming said that standard work is the start to improving any process. And again, a simple diagram just to reiterate that. We start with our standard work. Standard work means that we have a documented way to do something. Everybody follows the standard. And often that isn't the starting point, and we have to start somewhere. And very often it's asking lots of people for their ideas about what is the standard way, what is the best way. But if we don't have standard work, we don't have a process to improve. From that, if we're trying to improve, we use our 8 steps. And when we get to our 8th step and we've made an improvement, again, we revise our standard work and we sustain the gains. And then we do it again and we sustain the gain again. So over time, our standard work gets better and better, and in many organizations it gets simpler and simpler because we eliminate the possibility for error. And over years in a business, what we're really doing is we're engaging the experience of all the employees into that standard work. All the best ideas, all the best tools, all the best tips are all built into the standard work. So our new employee on day one is being set up for success. Set up that the chances are, if they follow that and we put the training in, that they will actually succeed from when they start, not learn as they go along, which happens in many roles. Tip number 9, very simple one, mentioned it earlier. It's about workplace organization. And it's amazing how much time is lost just because we're badly organized in the workplace. And this is an example from the NHS, which I really like. You'll find it on their website in the lean section. This is a trolley coming into an operating theatre, and it's been kitted by the staff in the hospital. Not always nursing staff kit these. And again, to set the staff up for success, the wrong time to find out when something isn't on that trolley or is missing or is incorrect would be when the consultant needs to use whatever's on the trolley, and certainly wouldn't be the best time for the patient who is undergoing the treatment. So how do we set up that person for success? One part of it is workplace organisation, and in this example the team looked at this particular operation with a view to how do we set up the people for success. And it's quite a simple solution. Same trolley. On top we now have a template, and a template for each operation. There's a bigger subject around this called 5S, about organising workplaces, but that's about organising all the tools required for an operation. And as we say, the staff who've kitted the tools for the operation are much more confident that what is required is exactly what's going in. And probably as importantly, when the operation or the procedure is complete, that what's going out is what came in as well. And finally, last tip, um, we must make sure that everybody in any organisation knows what's important, and that is the role of the leadership team. And we need to measure that, because typically whatever is measured gets done well. People realise what's being measured. Having too many measures is a mistake. Trying to get only a few measures that everybody in the operation understands and can remember is the key to making this work. And again, it's about sharing that. And this might be a simple set of metrics in a business, and they'll all be different in any business. And very often they're based around productivity and quality and safety and delivery, something around that. So making clear what's important to any workforce is key to a lean success, and making sure that's measured and shared with on a regular basis. Sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's weekly, sometimes monthly. Anything beyond that, maybe people don't pay as much attention as they should to. So have a look at that in your business. And that is 10 tips to setting up a lean operation. A final takeaway, a summary of lean. If there's one thing to remember, lean starts with customers, and customers will define the requirements of your process. Our advice is that you respect people and involve them in making those processes that deliver value to the customer. And it's all about recognizing what adds value and eliminating all that waste. And going around that circle should grow your business and improve the bottom line. And finally, what we've covered, 10 tips. The customer will always decide value in a business. Secondly, the opposite of value is waste, and we talked about 10 of them. Thirdly, we look at our business as a value stream. It's made up of lots of time where we add value and lots of time where we don't add value. And typically the value added time could be 5% of that total or less. Problem solving, anybody can do it. Everybody loves doing it. If engaged correctly, there's 8 steps, and followed correctly will deliver fantastic results. Kaizen is about engaging people in all the causes that could be causing a problem in a process. The goal of leaders and the goal of owners of a business is to create that environment for Kaizen and problem solving, being able to map processes, being able to talk about waste in a safe environment where we're actually going to support the team to eliminate the waste. It's about building quality processes, and it's about giving people the confidence to shout up when things aren't correct and giving them the support to make those things better. It's about standard work for every operation, which gives people the best opportunity to succeed. And that's about getting all the experience of all the staff into the process. And again, making that better, the more people that come into the business with new ideas. Workplace organisation is key, and if it's done well, it'll eliminate errors and it'll eliminate an awful lot of the waste. And finally, it's about making sure that we share and give feedback on all of the key measures within the business. Supporting all this are many modules that go into lots more details. I've just given a summary up here of there are lean tools, there's lean in construction, there's lean introduction for leaders, performance benchmarking against other business. There's a number of programs available, Lean Start. Six Sigma is a complementary process improvement to Lean. There's yellow belts, green belts, black belts. Value stream mapping we mentioned, again a specific tool that needs a bit of practice. SMED or quick changeover. 5S is the workplace organisation tool. Kaizen we've mentioned, problem solving, 8 steps. Preventative maintenance or asset care, and it's all about transforming the culture in any business.